Okay, here is my hoard of unfinished projects. Some are finished that I didn't like the end result and it didn't sell, so I'm gonna redo it. There are some that I started a long time ago, like these. These are like Dollar Tree items and then like a taco shell. And I just stuck it to the side, never finished. Got pictures, tons of pictures. Some things that I bought and I'm just not a huge fan of the end result, or it's not like part of my decor anymore. So we have a ton. What do I have here? 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14. Looks like 16 different items. And I also have a ton of spray paint. Got a ton of it in bulk. This is ivory in gloss, and the other one that I have is black gloss. So we're gonna do some in black, some in the glossy ivory. The only reason I'm doing spray paint is because I have a ton of it and I decided they're both neutral colors and the gloss finish is perfect for this type of decor. So I am going to kind of set up an assembly line and we're going to start there and then decide how to embellish each of them.
If you are new here, my name is Natalie and I am the owner and creator behind Sparks of Joy Studio. Welcome to my channel. I love doing all kinds of thrift flips and DIYs, and today I have another round of budget-friendly DIYs. I'm not going to show you all of those ceramic containers that I spray painted, but I did want to give you a quick peek at some of the things that I like to do with this type of decor. I have this other riser that I had thrifted a little while back, and I'm painting it with 3 coats of Victorian lace. And this is some amazing greenery that I got off of Julie's website from Julie's Designs and Signs. I love her greenery because it looks so realistic and is so easy to take those half spheres, which are my favorite to get off of her website, and use them in a variety of ways. Besides just stacking them on top of a book, you can also put them onto different containers like those teapots and the vases that I spray painted recently, and then you're done. It's perfect for staging. It's perfect for just some extra decor or greenery that you want around the house. So I would highly recommend you check out our website. It is a little pricier than maybe Michael's or Walmart would provide, but the quality is so much better. You'll get to see some of these staging techniques throughout today's video. Next, I have this sign that I thrifted while I was on vacation back over spring break, and I'm going to start by covering the entire thing in this gray paint. This is a pink couture color. I do not remember the color the name of the color. Oh, Mystic Gray. That's what it is. Mystic Gray. I covered it and let it dry, and now I'm coming back with this white paint color by Fusion. I believe this is Cobblestone by Fusion, and it is an all-in-one paint. I'm going to give the entire piece a quick coat of this, but I do end up deciding to go in a different direction because right around this time is when I also received my Alchemy Paints by Fusion. I ended up covering the entire project with 2 good coats of the color Sage, which is an alchemy paint, one of the new paints by Fusion. And I set the sign aside to dry, and while it was drying, I grabbed these 2 swan cutouts that I cut out using my Creality A1 laser cutter, and I am painting them both in the color birch. I'm only going to be painting them with 1 coat. I'm not as worried about how much coverage I'm giving, mainly because I am going to be using some decoupage on top of these swans. Now that that paint is dry, I grabbed this napkin decoupage or this decoupage napkin that I'm going to be using. This is one of the free napkins you will receive if you purchase the bundle 5 of Connie Lines and Designs paper. And I am just positioning them so that I can use like 1/2 on both of these swans, and then the other half I'll be able to use on another project. What I decided to do was just go in with my scissors to cut it down, mainly because I don't have to be worried about, showing off a torn edge or anything. These are going to cover the entire swan, and then I'll be able to sand down the excess. I am using my Fusion decoupage gel for this project. I do find it to be the easiest for me to use with napkins. It doesn't rip, it's not too sticky, but it allows everything to go on nice and smooth. As I've mentioned before, I do not use water or mist in any way when I'm decoupaging with a napkin. I will do that if I am decoupaging with the rice paper or with Royce's paper, I will, but not with a napkin just because I worry about bleed through. And it's so much easier for this paper to rip. Getting it wet will make that even easier. As you saw, I was able to lift and lower my napkin with ease to kind of fix the positioning of it. And that is one of the reasons why I really enjoy working with the Decoupage Gel by Fusion. Once I have that napkin laid down, I come back with another layer of the decoupage gel and I use it to seal the top of my project. After I'm done with this swan, I will repeat this entire process on the other swan. You will also notice that I have the swans facing each other. That means that, or that's because I wanted them to be facing each other on the sign, but the one on the left has the engraved like face and features of the body of the swan, where the one on the right does not. You do end up seeing through a little bit of that with the decoupage napkin, especially where I or how I place the napkin on, but I'm not as worried about that. And I also want to just showcase how you could use some of my wood cutouts that do have that engraving in multiple ways. Once that decoupage medium was dry, I came back to sand down the excess. Before I did that though, I grabbed some scissors and I am cutting into the parts of the paper where there is kind of like a curve around the swan, just because I was worried that I would tear it or not get as good of a sanding in those spots. So I do this prior to sanding and then I begin sanding down very, very gently. You do not need to be rough because A, this is just a napkin, and B, that is very, although it is solid wood, it's got the, or not solid wood, it's basswood, and it's got, a good thickness to it. It is still very easy to kind of rip it back a little bit if you are a little too rough with that sander. So just be mindful of that as you are doing a project like this. I did decide to dry brush some of that white birch paint by Alchemy onto my piece. And now I'm coming back with some of these stamps from the ephemera type stamp set by IOD. And I just want to embellish it around where the swans will be. I've already kind of positioned where I want those stamps to go based on how I had my swans placed. And now I'm just going to go ahead and place those stamps in different areas around the board. I am intending for these details to be rather subtle. I am not looking for anything to really pop, just to create a little bit of extra detail around the board and around those two swans. I felt like it would look way too plain if it was just two swans on a board without any other detail on it. I do bring my swans back every once in a while to make sure that I have everything positioned how I want it and to see where there might be some extra like details needed on that sign. I do finish this up by gluing on those two swans with some Type Bond Quick and Thick, and then leaving them overnight with some books stacked on top of them to add on that pressure. Here's a look at our finished swan sign.
All right, I have these 3 pieces of scrap wood. These are from that pallet that I said I found on the side of the road. My husband has cut it down to a variety of, they're almost all this size, which you could do signs. I kind of have some other ideas for it. And I have this Varathane wood stain in the color Rustic Sage. So I have to mix it up. It's been sitting in my stash for a long, long time. So I gotta mix it up really, really well. And then we're gonna stain these 3 pieces in this color.
Okay, after doing all this work, stirring everything up, making sure it's ready, getting out my brush, and then staining all 3 of these boards and leaving them out in the sun, I did not like the color it ended up as. It kind of almost looked like it was like molded or mildewy wood. It didn't actually provide the color that I wanted. That just could be my personal preference. I wish it had stayed a color more like this, but even after staining it with 2 coats, it didn't look like that. So I'm showing you a different board or a different riser, but I'm actually going to do the riser as well as those 3 boards all in this cottage color, which is one of the DIY cottage colors. It is all in one. It is relatively good for outdoor weather from what I'm hearing. So I'm going to paint those signs as well as this in 2 to 3 coats of that color. Once that's done and dry, I do come in with a 220 grit sandpaper and my orbital sander, and I'm going to sand back a good amount of the paint on all of those boards as well as the riser. Now I'm going to be using my IOD stamp sets. This is the typesetting stamp, and I'm using the all capitals for this sign. I'm going to use one or two of them are going to be all capitals. The other one is going to be with the lowercase letters from that set. And I'm just going to be spelling out different words. This one's going to say rustic. The other two will be a little different. I am using the white birch by Alchemy by Fusion, and I am painting it onto my painting sponge and then dabbing it onto my stamps, which will then be stamped onto my sign. This creates a really distressed and rustic look, which is perfect for the style of these signs. So once I'm finished laying it down, I pull it back, and you can see over on the R, there's a little bit of that paint that didn't get on there, but I'm okay with that. This second sign is going to say primitive. And for this one, I did use the lowercase letters. And another thing I wanted to show you is how you can use the set even when you have a word that has the same letter multiple times. Typically, you'll see me use 2 sets of stamps because I have them. But for this one, I kind of wanted to show you, since I had to use the I 3 times, I do not have 3 sets. I wanted to show you how I did this. I spaced out my words, and then once I was finished stamping on all of the word without those 2 other I's, I went back in with just that stamp, added a little bit more paint, and then stamped it into those spaces that I had left. For this third sign, I'm going to be using the word vintage, and I am going to be spacing everything out and setting it up onto my board rather than trying to line it up onto the grid of that thin mount. The reason I'm doing this is because sometimes I find it a little bit easier to set it up this way rather than worrying so much about how it's lined up on the grid. I actually do a worse job when I try to do that because it's hard for me to see, especially with these stamps that have been used many, many times. It's hard for me to see where the line is relative to the actual stamp, not the overall piece of the stamp, if that makes sense, because the back part of it does have an extra kind of overhang from the stamp itself. Once I have that lined up exactly how I want, I grab my thin mount, and you can see that some of the letters are hanging off of the thin mount that I have here a little bit. That's just because this is one that I have cut down, and it's okay, it will still work. And then I use my exact same method that I just used on the other two, where I paint my paint onto the painting sponge, and then I work to get it onto the letters and then stamp it onto the sign.
So because these already have that distressed look from using the sponge, I'm not going to need to sand anything back to make it look any more rustic or primitive. All I'm going to do now is just seal it, and I am going to use my clear matte sealer for 2 reasons. One, because it does provide a very matte finish, and 2, because it is beautiful outside. So this will help me finish quickly. So I'm just going to spray it on, give it a coat. I don't have to worry about covering like the back or the sides as much because we use that cottage color, which is already sealed. Let that dry, and this project is done.
For the riser that I created with the same paint job that I just gave on those three signs, I'm going to be using this lattice stamp from IOD. I believe it's part of the veranda stamp set. And I'm going to be using a different paint color for this project. This is the color Spruce, which is an alchemy paint by Fusion. And I'm going to be stamping it onto my stamp, or pressing it onto my stamp using that same sponge paint method. And once I have done that, I will lay it down using the top of the stamp as kind of my guide on the top of the riser. When you are doing a project like this, especially because you know you're going to need to do a repeated pattern, it's going to be very important to make sure that you have everything lined up appropriately, accurately, so that as you repeat that pattern, everything remains in line and straight going across. Now I'm just going to grab this tiny little transfer from the Catarina transfer set, which is the most recent, not the most recent release, the spring release, so just a few months ago. And I am going to transfer it on to the bottom right of my riser. I really like doing off-center stuff. I don't know if that's like very popular, but it is something that I prefer to do, or I really like. I'm not that great at centering anyway, so it kind of helps me out a little bit. Before I seal everything up, I am going to get a very light sanding done on my riser to distress the lattice a little bit more and to provide very light distressing to that transfer. Again, I'm not going heavy-handed here. I want to help the actual lattice that look as distressed as the rest of the project, but I do not want to ruin the transfer. So just be very careful if you are going to do this part of the project. I seal this with some antiquing glaze and then we are done.
For this one, I have this wood cutout that I did on my laser cutter. It is a 1/4 inch thick. I have painted the front of it in white paint, I don't even remember if it might have been Victorian lace because that's what I had out at the time, but it doesn't matter. Just paint it in a white paint because we're going to be using decoupage. This does come with your large mystery box bundle. It comes with about 20 different napkins. Let's do it this way. We're only going to use the one with the stars anyway, so we're just going to cut that out. So I'm going to go ahead and cut it. And when you cut it down the middle, the great thing about this is you automatically have an opening somewhere because the middle parts here, typically, unless this is a 1-ply napkin, no, there it is. See, once you cut it down the middle, then you can easily find it. On the outside of the napkin, it's usually kind of pressed down. And now what we're going to do is just find a good place. I'm going to use the Fusion decoupage gel, but I will not be using any water for this. I get worried about bleed through, and so I just use the decoupage gel or whatever decoupage medium works for you with napkins. I'm going to lay it down and then cover it up. The method that works the best for me to avoid wrinkles would be the iron-on method, but I am trying to get better at using different methods with napkins. I also figured this has kind of got like a more primitive and rustic look to it anyway, so a few wrinkles probably won't matter for the design on here. Oops.
Once that was dry, I came back with that same method of cutting the sides around the curves and then using my sanding sponge as well as my finger sander to sand the excess paper off. Once I finished up with that, I looked at my board and realized that the wrinkles, although they looked okay for what I was going to do next, I didn't like the way that it felt. It was a little bit too rough, and I just feel like that kind of feeling could end up creating issues in the future. So I did use my sander, my sanding sponge, to sand back those wrinkles and created even more of a distressed look than what I originally had. I do decide that this is going to be a pretty cool and different way of looking at this project, and you'll see once I use some antiquing glaze on it how those details really come out.
The world had more of your smile, What if the wind could spread your love? What if your sweetness could reach everyone? There'd be no wars.
As you can see, I added a pretty thick nautical rope to the top where that hole is, and I frayed the edges, which I really liked the effect that it gave. It's almost like adding the fringe of a bow without having to do a detailed bow, which I'm not great at. For our last project today, I am going to take these 4 coasters that I got in bulk off of Amazon, and I am going to start by painting them all in that white birch by Alchemy by Fusion. And I'm going to give them 2 coats of that color, and once it is dry, I'll sand it back, and then we're going to be using our reverse transfer method with a new freebie I have available for you on my website. One thing I do want to mention, as I am lightly sanding the top, I am also going around the sides of each of the coasters as there were a couple of rough edges, and I just wanted to make sure everything was very smooth before I did this next step. Okay, these are 2 of the prints that are available for free. I designed these specifically for that more Americana look, but I wanted it to look vintage and I wanted it to look more unique and patterned. I didn't necessarily just want like an American flag or just stars. I wanted there to be like kind of a more ornate or unique detail to it. I'm just going to be cutting each of these papers in half and using them, each of them or each half, on a different coaster. So once I have those cut down, I'm going to get out my Decor Decoupage matte glue, and I am going to begin this method of gluing or putting the decoupage glue onto the paper, then placing it onto the coaster where that dried and sanded white paint is, and then making sure it is very, very matted down, transferred on, and letting it sit. To make sure that I was very clear about how long it took, I did set a timer for 2 hours before I came back to rub off the excess paper on the top of each of these coasters. It is just under 2.5 hours. And I have misted my microfiber cloth, and we are going to begin rubbing away to reveal our image. I'm not going to bore you with watching the entire process. The important thing to note here is that you want to make sure that you are working quickly, but making sure you're not applying too much pressure. You are going to rub off all of that white paper. You will get that image off. It just takes a little bit of time and patience and getting used to the method. When I was less sure of myself earlier on in learning this process, I used my ring finger as much as possible because I knew that my ring finger provides the least amount of pressure out of all of my fingers. Once I was done with that, I pulled off what I could, and then I came back, let it dry, and I'm going to use some antiquing glaze to seal up the top and then also the back of each of my coasters. I do decide to tie these together, and they can be sold as a set with a little bit of greenery tied around. I hope you've enjoyed today's video. Please let me know in the comments which project was your favorite. I hope you had a wonderful Memorial Day, and I will see you soon. Have a wonderful week.